Teachers or Reddit, what simple gesture from a student brightened up your shitty day? I'm a college instructor, and it's always nice when students show genuine interest or acknowledge me as a human being. For example, today one of my students and I ended up walking the same direction after class, and as we went we chatted about class-related things. It wasn't anything huge or remarkable, but it always brightens my day when my students are friendly and comfortable talking to me outside of class. Yours is the only class I've ever wanted to wake up early for. I'm a professor, and I get upset when people tell me about how entitled this generation of college students is. I see gratitude, hard work, and thoughtfulness quite often. Here's one little story in class. I mentioned having a headache. At the end of class, one of my students gives me 2 extra strength Tylenol. Tiny gesture, but so sweet. Here's another thing that delights me when my students want to introduce me to their parents at graduation. I'm at a large state school in the US. So there's usually a lot of anonymity, and it's fairly impersonal. But when these students introduce me to their parents, and their parents say, "Oh, your drive. Frau Boots? Thank you for everything you've done for my son-daughter," well, I'm floating for days. One more small gesture when one of my students stays after class to ask a question, and as he helps me erase the board. Again, small gesture, but so thoughtful. I teach private trombone lessons in middle schools. A couple weeks ago I was working with a 6th grade beginner who was finally making some serious progress after weeks of struggling to figure out the mechanics of making a pleasant sound by buzzing into a long bandy piece of metal. As we were playing some long tones, an 8th grader who I've taught for the past 2 years opens the door to the practice room. This kid has been through some stuff since I've known him, and he isn't always the nicest, or most socially graceful of the middle school boys I teach, not that they're an especially graceful bunch. He looks right at the awkward little 6th grader and said something along the lines of, "You sound great. Man. I remember hearing you when you first started at the beginning of the year and you've made a ton of progress. Keep it up." Seeing my formerly troubled student act with such maturity and kindness, and seeing how happy it made the younger boy was amazing. I may have teared up just a tiny bit. This was a few years ago, but it is by far the most heartwarming and heartbreaking thing a child has ever said to me. I was with a group of after-school kids, 2 brothers and their sister. They lived with their dad, mom wasn't in the picture. While playing in the sandbox, out of nowhere, the girl looked at me and said, "Ms. Pica Cakes, I wish you were my mommy." It made me so happy, and so sad all at once. 2 stories from 5th grade where I worked as a para-reading teacher. I had a kid who was always distracted and out there, but genuinely tried his best. Sweetest little guy. One day he walks up to my desk with an expression of pure joy. That was replaced by the most baffled face I've ever seen. He then solemnly said, "Miss Gerlich, my train of thought just chugga-choo-chooed away." He marched back to his desk and sat down while I tried not to die laughing. Second one. On my last day as a para, before I had to switch to subbing only due to health needs, a boy who'd been hell on wheels to every teacher the entire year came up and gave me a hug. This kid had a hard situation and would try everything in the book to get out of class, which was why he was my partner in class projects. I'd take as much time as we needed to get through a page, or his name, or just to stay in class without hiding. So, he hugged me as I left and said I was his favorite teacher because I never got mad, and I needed to come and sub his class, so he'd know I hadn't ditched him. I held it together until he left, cried in the car, and you better believe I took every sub job to his classroom that year. Kid is finally in a better situation and I couldn't be happier. I'm a band teacher, and this is my first year. So far it's been rough. The parents aren't pleased with what I'm doing, and it looks like I got on the wrong side of the loudest woman with nothing better to do with her time than to badmouth the new kid on the block. I've had several parents actually yelling at me over random things. Principal isn't happy with me, and is backing the parents. All I'm doing is holding kids accountable for learning their instruments. I was helping one of my students learn music for honor band auditions after school. After we finished up, she told me that her mom noticed a vast improvement since the start of the year. She also told me that I'm one of the best directors to teach at the school in over 5 years. It's a K-12. I think at this point I started tearing up. It was the first time I was complimented on how I do my job. That was only last week. It meant a lot to me. I have a student who has severe emotional trauma in one of my classes. Yesterday he brought a big book of Edgar Allan Poe to history class and shared his favorite poem with me. Needless to say, this was a huge risk for the student due to the nature of the trauma he has suffered. This simple gesture of trying to make a connection and show trust is nearly enough to make me cry. Instructor at a large university. I'm blessed with the responsibility of teaching one class with less than 25 students. I've been here a few semesters thus far, and I always get some students who tell me that they enjoy how I teach, the course, etc. I've had my fair share of students who say that they have switched majors to the major I'm a part of because they enjoy my class so much. It feels good to hear that I'm helping refine someone's life path, but the following takes the cake. In a previous semester I had this student. He was a transfer student from a community college. He wasn't the brightest, nor was he the hardest working. He kept to himself most of the time, but he had this knack of always finding humor and making the class laugh. Halfway through the semester, the class was assigned to give individual, personal presentations allowing for the use of stories and/or personal experiences. Nearly the entire class had emailed me prior to their presentation with questions regarding how I felt about the topics they were present on, nearly everyone but him. I reached out to him and asked him if he was doing well, just to check in. He quickly replies with a vague reply about what he was working on, and what his presentation topic would be. I didn't want to force him to tell me his topic area, because I didn't want to pry. It wasn't required for the students to clear their topics with me, but I suggested that they do it for guidance. Then comes the day of his presentation. I wasn't sure what he was going to present. Half of me expected him to give a humorous presentation, as per his usual behaviors in class. However, his presentation was far from that. It was a beautiful memoir of how he overcame his depression after being sexually assaulted and becoming a stronger human. I didn't expect it, no one did. His presentation was one of the best presentations of the semester, and probably one of the best I have seen thus far. After class I walked out of the building to walk to my office, and I saw him sitting outside alone. I approached him and thanked him for sharing his story, and commended him for his courage to share something that personal with the class. His reply? Thanks you the Omega Pi. I feel comfortable in your class. You're the only professor I have that keeps me attending this university. If it wasn't for you, I don't think I'd be enrolled here much longer. I hate my school, absolutely hate it. The staff are horrible to the students and each other. One kid keeps getting screamed at and comes in most days crying. Had a parents' meeting with his mom and dad. His mom told me I'm his favorite teacher because I'm calm and relaxed. Came at a perfect time and I've stopped looking for other jobs. Was teaching English at a school in the countryside of Chile. Word had gotten around that I used to work in coffee shops. An 8th grader, not my grade level, surprised me one morning with a thermos of hot percolated Italian roast and said, "Now you not have to drink that stuff in the teacher's room." Kids can be so rad, man. I am a high school teacher. For me it's as simple as a student having an honest conversation with me. Many high schoolers are extremely closed off towards adults, never more than hi, don't really make eye contact, etc. It's nice when a student will stop by your office just to talk or to ask advice on something. My tutoring student from Yemen told me today I was exactly like his favorite teacher, Mrs. Lopez, except she is blonde and I have black hair. He said I make him feel okay even though he thinks it's scary at school because he has no friends. And then at the end of our session he said I was his friend because he can talk to me about his feelings and about racing bikes, and I think it's cool. It took a lot not to have me tear up on the half-hour drive home. In the middle of teaching a math lesson to my 4th graders, I got a paper cut. I said ouch, and then spent a grand total of about 2 seconds looking down to examine the damage. When I looked up, one little boy was already standing in front of me holding a band-aid. So darn sweet. A few times, students have come up to shake my hand at the end of the course. I also once got a gift from a student because I let them reschedule their final exam. I don't know if I was supposed to take it, but that was really sweet. Whenever I see a student go out of their way to pick up some trash that isn't theirs or stack a chair another kid left behind simply because they want to not to get praise. I had a student with autism. We developed a tradition at lunch where I would ask for one of his cookies and he would say no. Sometimes I would act like I was going to take one and he would grab them. As I walked away, he would hug his cookies and smile. It was our daily joke. On Monday morning of Teacher Appreciation Week, he realized he didn't get me anything and started to panic. I kept reassuring him that it was okay, but he continued deeper into a meltdown. He ran to his lunchbox and pulled out a cookie and gave it to me. I wish I could have kept that cookie forever. I took an extra week off after New Year's to bury my father, a few years back. First day back, I'm in my classroom, getting ready for second period. I didn't have first. Student comes in a minute early and said, "Sir, I'm sorry about your dad." I smiled, said thank you, and turned toward the blackboard to finish something, and when I turned back, he was gone. I spotted him walking into the classroom across the hall. That's when I realized, he was in my period 3 class, not period 2. He could have waited 45 minutes to say something, but he made that little extra effort for me. I reminded him of that in June on graduation day. When I was doing the final year of my undergraduation, I taught drawing at a local institute to kids between 6 and 9 years old. On one of those days, after class, a couple of the parents were late to come pick up their children because of a traffic rerouting on the road outside. I got bored and decided to draw the portrait of one of my students. A cute 6-year-old. It was a very rough sketch, just outlines and some very minor shading. One of the kids watching me draw said, "You are even better than Leonardo da Vinci." Made me chuckle. It was and probably will always be the best compliment I've ever gotten. During my internship last semester, I had a student give me a donut for Teacher Appreciation Day, even though I was still about a year away from being a full-fledged teacher. It's the little things in life. I had a student that was a recent immigrant from Africa. I was teaching geography and I was showing her something on the globe. She wanted to know what all the blue was. You could see her brain exploding at the thought of all that water. I thought that was so cool. As a substitute teacher, I really appreciate the kids who do the work they are assigned, and the ones who help me with attendance. I teach English to some pretty low-level Korean students, so anytime I see them outside of school and they try use all their English with me is guaranteed to make me feel better just knowing that me being there inspires them enough to want to try. Mr. PSWRD. I just realized. Teaching is a hard job. I couldn't imagine doing what you do every day. You're really good at it. That fact that someone knows what I go through every day, makes me feel a little bit better. One of my students, 4th grade said, "Ms. Have a Disney day. I used to think science was boring worksheets, but you make it fun." As a huge science nerd, that was one of the best things I've ever heard. I work with 2-year-olds. I stood up and banged my head on some furniture. One of my kids, just started talking in full sentences, asked me if I was okay and kissed the bump. I actually have a shitton of uplifting stories. Like the time a 1-year-old told me I was beautiful. Or when 2-year-olds just spent their entire outside time holding hands and walking around. Or when one student was leaving and her friend shouted, "I love you." I used to sub-SP Ed, all grades, all ages. One week I was working with an autistic preschooler. He was great, but he was very nonverbal, which was an issue that had been worked on for weeks. I was monitoring him during one recess. He was not having a great day, but after a few tries we found a swinging game he loved. He laughed, which was unusual, and after said "Gracias, Mexican family." It was a huge deal that he even opened his mouth, let alone used words. That's still one of the best memories I have. Little notes. Today while I was working with one group and had my back to another, one of the girls in the group with my back to it went up to the board and just wrote, not in any huge font, "We appreciate you, Mr. PBR." Didn't say anything and I didn't notice until it was planning. But it was sweet, and last week I had a student leave a short 1-sentence note thanking me for teaching him how to improve his essay. Just a thank you for in 1 sentence on paper. Which I live because I can keep those. And I have a box with every letter and every little note anyone has ever given me. Those mean so much to me. One of my students today came up after class and said that for the first time the poem we analyzed wasn't too bad, which as an engineering student and president of the STEM club, meant a lot. Thank yous and acknowledgements of what you learned mean a lot. And mean even more when written. I'm not a teacher, but a student. Our teacher's mother recently died from cancer, last Friday, and our teacher is coming back on Thursday. Because it's an AP class, she tries to help us even when she's not there. We all know how hard this has been for her, and so my class of 19 pooled together some money to buy her flowers and we made a poster with all of our condolences. Hopefully when she gets back she'll be really touched by it. Edit 1. Hi everybody. I want to thank you all for your nice words and the stranger who popped my gold cherry. I just looked now and this blew up. I don't know how to get a picture on here. But the flowers we got are really pretty. I'll update again hopefully with pictures and more about how this all turned out. Edit 2. Hi guys. We gave the flowers to our teacher yesterday and she loved them. Our class as a whole decided not to make a huge deal about it because we didn't want her to miss her mom more than she already does. What we didn't know that made this even more special to her is that her mother was an avid gardener. Our teacher did cry a lot but was really happy with us and I think that she'll always be grateful for it. Now the flowers are currently sitting in her room because she wants everyone to look at them. Anyway, thank you all for your support with this comment. Not a teacher, but when I was in 8th grade I had this teacher who would always read this book of poems and stories by Edgar Allan Poe. He read with such passion and changed his voice for each character as well. His reading made my love for Edgar Allan Poe grow immensely. I was always on cloud 9 and sat with excitement while he read. After class would dismiss for our next period I would always go up and talk about the story and how much I loved it. During my 8th grade promotion, I would now be attending high school. He walked up to my family and I after the ceremony and gifted me with his book. I cried so hard and was so embarrassed because my family had no clue why I was crying. I wish I knew what he felt or what he was thinking at the time. I always felt like such a bother by coming up to him after each reading session. 16 years later and I still have the book. As the art teacher, I don't have more than an hour a week with some of my students, but they will continue to be my students next year too. Some of my students recently entered a portrait contest with the topic being heroes in my life. A student who has been in my classes for around 7 years, K-12 private school, entered a portrait of my likeness. I didn't see the entries until I opened the winner's announcement sent to the school. Not a small act, but made me feel valued,